Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the state of Canadian law on abortion. Now, Professor Gilbert, abortion in Canada is a healthcare service, and healthcare is a provincial responsibility. So are there provincial restrictions on abortion? And I'm talking about this separately from, practical access. So for example, I know that abortions are not performed after 23 weeks in Canada, and in some provinces, they're not performed after 12, 13, 14, 16 weeks, depending on the province. But how is that? Is it restricted by law? Is it restricted by regulation? Or is it a resource issue like physician training or physician availability?
So it's not restricted by law. There are no provincial statutes which set out gestational limits for abortion, but it's a combination of the other things that you've mentioned. It's a combination of the regulatory authorities in the different provinces, practice standards, availability of physicians, the availability of the service in province. There's many provinces in Canada which have many faith-influenced hospitals where abortions are not performed. And so, in those places, the access is dependent upon clinics, and clinics don't usually have the capacity to do much later-term abortions, which are more complicated and really require a hospital setting. And so it's a combination of the regulatory authority of the physicians and the practices that have evolved over the time.
Professor Mathen, sort of same question. If there are actually regulations that govern this, the 23-week availability, would those be constitutional restrictions? Have they ever been challenged?
I'm not aware of completed challenges, but some provinces have been challenged because of the nature of the restrictions they've placed on abortion. And what the Supreme Court of Canada has said in another case involving Henry Morgentaler is that provinces cannot put in place barriers because they believe abortion is morally wrong. If they do that, then they are in effect making criminal law, and they don't have the power to do that. So it has to very much be grounded in healthcare, in health and in healthcare rationales. And so a strict limit, a gestational limit, like Professor Gilbert talked about, that would seem to me to be suspect, because it would surely depend on the particular case whether an abortion might be unfortunately necessary.
So, Professor Gilbert, if access to abortion in Canada is not in practice available after 23 weeks, or 23 weeks and 6 days, I think is a technical limit. I mean, what happens to those women? Let's be clear, 23 weeks is quite far along in a pregnancy, and it strikes me that probably these are most likely to be wanted babies, and that something terrible has happened that means the baby is not viable, or that the mother's life is in danger. But in those cases, those terrible and tragic cases, what if abortion's not available, what happens to these women?
Well, there's a couple of things that happen. One is women can travel to the United States, where there are certain places where abortions are available up to 26 weeks. And so we have partnership arrangements with clinics in the United States, and we can facilitate that transfer of patient. But also, a lot of those, as you say, those later term abortions are the most heartbreaking. And many of them, I think, lead to induced labor, and sort of the baby is born, and the parents get to spend a bit of time with the baby, but it's not an abortion per se, it's an induced labor, and it's just a very tragic circumstance.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. Professor Mathen, there's also, we're talking now about sort of late stage, but there's of course early stage in the form of abortion medications and pills. What's access to those pills like in Canada? For example, who can prescribe them, and when can they be used?
It's very patchy. This comes into, this intersects with professional colleges, like including pharmacists and so forth. And really it depends on, are you able to access a licensed professional who is willing to dispense you the medication? And that, I think, is it's also a huge issue that lies under the surface. In some places, it's quite straightforward to get this medication, and in other places in Canada, it's much more difficult. And there may not be anyone within your area that is willing to prescribe it. And so then you may have to, for example, see if you can order them by mail.